Okay, this is Adam House with week 6 of my undergraduate diary of a college course in resisting fascism and global history. Alright, so this week was another book. We did read an entire book and did a review of the book and a dissection really of the book, so it's kind of in-depth. So this is the book that we read for this week. It's called Diary of a Man in Despair, written by Friedrich Reck. And the publication date, so the book is written in diary form over the course of several years. The first entry by Reck being in May of 1936. And the journal has several entries going through last entry is 14th of October 1944. So just quickly, so we know who Reck is, he was a army veteran. He was a soldier himself, a veteran. At the time of this writing, he began when he was in his 50s, and the last writing is when he's about 60 years old is where we lose him. So, Diary of a Man in Despair. So originally it was first published in Germany in 1947. So Friedrich Reck was living in Germany around the Munich area. He was in the Bavarian region. He was actually not a leftist. He was an anti-fascist conservative. He considered himself a conservative in the sense that he was a bit of a nationalist, but more of a conservative monarchist. His politics seems to run based on things that he said. He probably would have rejected the French Revolution and wished that things would go back to like a monarchy pre-French Revolution. So he's not a leftist, he's not a socialist, he's not any kind of does not have left politics, but like I say, very much he calls himself a conservative on at least 2 different pages, maybe 3 different pages in this book. First of all, this book is highly readable. There are places where it's a little slow and a little quirky. A few places where it's a little verbose and maybe a little highfalutin. So Reck was an extremely educated man. He was a student of history. He liked to read a lot. He apparently had a very large library and enjoyed spending a lot of time in his library with his nose in his books. And it shows in his writing. He makes a lot of historical references. Some of them that I know, some of them that I absolutely did not know and still don't know. Some of the references that he made, I still don't know what he was talking about. But he was a highly educated historian. But he was a man of some wealth, not very opulent wealth, but at least very well to do. He had a nice home. He had a lot of land, a lot of property that he lived on. And so this apparently put him in a position on the social ladder in the Munich area of Germany, where he was fairly insulated from some of the things that were happening to other people, especially poor and Jewish people and other people who were being persecuted by the Third Reich. So again, his reading or his writings begin in 1936. So at this point, Hitler has already come to power, and the Germans are living under the Nazi regime. Of course, 36 is also when you have the Olympics that happen in Germany. And a lot of the historians say that although the Nazis were already in power for a few years before the Olympics, after the Olympics was a real turning point for how much authoritarianism really came to the forefront. And during the Olympics, they apparently Germany did a pretty good job of hiding just how severe, how bad authoritarian things already were. But after the Olympics were over, then there was really no more reason for them to hide anything, or for them to worry about how things might reflect on them in an upcoming Olympics. Once the Olympics are over, they were just able to clamp down with an iron fist, and they did. So obviously by 1939, we've got the invasion of Poland, and World War II begins in earnest. So by 1941, by the end of 1941, the whole world is enveloped in World War II. So, all right. So, Friedrich Reck, appropriately named, his last name was very appropriate, and you can see from the title of the book, Diary of a Man in Despair. There's a reference in this book. He talks a little bit about how he misses the political opponents that he used to debate. The fact that leftists have either been completely purged from society, they've been killed, they've been rounded up and put into concentration camps, or maybe if they managed to escape the crackdown of the fascist regime, they were basically completely silent and pretending to be apolitical, or pretending that they were not opponents of the Third Reich, when in fact they still were. But they were so few and far between and difficult to find that Reck, he one of his entries, he talks about how he misses those people, and he misses the debates that he used to be able to have with his political opponents, and how he wishes that they could come back, and how that he wishes, instead of living under the auspices of the Third Reich, that he was still able to engage in these civil debates with political opponents, as opposed to living in fear under the brutal authoritarianism of the Nazi regime. So a couple of things that Reck talks about in this book. One of the things that he refers to is mass man. I believe mass man, his terminology, mass man seems to be a reference to collectivism, to collectivist thought, to collectivist ideology, in a very derogatory sense, in the sense that Reck saw the omnipotent cult of the state under fascism, under the cult of personality that he calls Hitlerism. He believed that this was a radical departure from what he valued as the intellect, as individualism, as the sovereignty of the individual, and his Reck has a very, how would I put it, he really appreciates intellectualism. He really appreciates an individual's ability for independent thought. So to be an independent thinker is something that Reck probably would have seen as a virtue, and if he had if he had met you and he had seen you as somebody who he thought was an individualist and an independent thinker, that probably would have made him like you to an extent, or at least respect you in some way. So he saw the rise of fascism for what it was, in the sense that fascism, as opposed to being an intellectual movement, it was really a movement of the passions. It was really based more on anger and fear and spite and hatred, and it really appealed to what he saw as the base instincts of the German people, and how they were being stripped of their ability for independent thought into this, what he calls mass man. What sometimes he refers to it as an ant heap, a pile of ants, like you might see in your yard sometimes on an ant hill, where all the ants just kind of pile up together. That's what he's referring to when he talks about the collective cult of the state under Hitlerism. The sheep, the non-thinking lemmings that are just following after the dear leader and fawning over the dear leader, and who have no real ideology other than Hitler is always right, which, is parallel to Mussolini, which, Mussolini actually had a motto, a saying that was printed and displayed on billboards and places all over Italy, that said, Mussolini is always right. Mussolini is right about everything. So that was a common theme for Mussolini, was that he wanted to portray the image that he was always right, that he was right about everything, and even if his ideas changed, he was still right. The new right, whatever his new idea was, it was now the right thing. And Hitler was very much the same way. So, this is another part of that autocratic piece of fascism. There tends to be an autocratic leader with a cult of personality around them, and the author here, Friedrich Reck, very much hated that cult of personality. Let's see, Reck. He talks sometimes about loneliness. He talks about being kind of isolated from his fellow travelers, from his fellow detractors, his fellow resistors. At least in 2 or 3 places, I remember him specifically saying that he was lonely, or that he was overcome with a sense of loneliness at a given time. But he also did a pretty good job of being able to sniff out other people who were kind of like-minded as him, and actually joined a resistance movement, an underground resistance movement that he called a phalanx of like-minded cohorts. Excuse me. And Reck, in order to, through all these years of entries that we have, again, we're talking about from 1936, May of 36 to October of 44. So you're talking about 8.5 years, something like that. The diary covers his life under the Nazi regime as a conservative, as an anti-fascist conservative under the Nazi regime for about 8 or 9 years. And during that time period, in order to maintain his sanity, he used his library and leaned very heavily on his books for inspiration and for comfort, and many of his entries definitely reflect that. So let's see. There's a few specific quotes in here that I really like. Let's see. So, um, Reck was angry. And it really comes across in here. He was very disappointed in his own country. He was extremely pissed off at his own fellow countrymen for succumbing to fascism and for allowing it to rise. And in his desperation, one of the things he said here, quote, "Nobody is moving to stop this before it is too late. It almost seems that they prefer to stand back and wait until the cobra breaks out. But I foresee a day when the nations will regret this cowardly passivity." Yeah, that's just one of the quotes that stood out to me. Um, he was extremely upset at his countrymen, and so here's another one. And this is the whole book is not like this paragraph. This one short paragraph I want to read to you here. The whole book is not like this, but a fair amount of it is. But this one paragraph is especially scathing. And so just to kind of give you an idea of just how desperate and upset, concerned, and angry that Reck was. He says, he's talking about Hitler and Hitlerites and the Third Reich here, but Hitler in particular he had referenced, and then he says, "I have hated you in every hour that has gone by. I hate you so that I would happily give my life for your death, and happily go to my own doom if only I could witness yours. Take you with me into the depths. When I let this hate free, I am almost overcome by it. But I cannot change this, and do not really know how it could be otherwise. Let no one deprecate this, nor fool himself about the power of such hatred. Hate drives to reality. Hate is the father of action. The way out of our defiled and desecrated house is through the command to hate Satan. Only so will we earn this right to search in the darkness for the way of love." He hated with what some people might call a purple passion, but he still had a countenance towards love. In fact, one of my favorite quotes, and I'm not sure. Yeah, here we go. He says something to this effect a couple of times, but speaking about his country, which he loves. He's a German. He's a conservative German. He considers himself a patriot. He very much loves his country. But he says here, "One must hate Germany now, truly and bitterly, in order once again, if only for the sake of its glorious past, to be able later to enfold it in all of one's love, like a parent with his misguided and unfortunate child." Yeah, and there's another one I'm going to paraphrase because I don't think I can find the quote real quick right now. But in another place, he said something to the effect that Germany under the Third Reich, as it is now, any German must hate his country to truly love it at this moment. So, something to that effect. Let's see. Yeah, so speaking about Reck being a conservative, and this is one of the reasons that we have several books to read in this class this semester. This is probably the book that I was most looking forward to, just based on the title of the book, because I do believe that a class in fascism and resisting fascism is prescient at the moment. It's timely, and in America right now, we're witnessing something that many of us would call fascist, and so I can relate just to the title of the book. I understand where he's coming from before I even read it, and the fact that one of the only few things that our professor told us about the book before we read it was that that this is a little bit of a unique perspective, in the sense that most of the other resistance authors that we're reading were leftists in some way, left of center, if not liberal or liberal or socialist or even communist. Reck is a little different in that he's a conservative anti-fascist, and a passionate anti-fascist conservative at that. So I was anxious to read this book because I don't really consider myself a leftist either. But, you know, even though I grew up in a conservative Republican home and I voted as a conservative Republican for Republican candidates for many years, over the years, my politics has evolved. I've left the Republican Party and became a libertarian for a good while, for over a decade actually. Voted libertarian mostly, and I've never been a Democrat. You know, I've voted for a few Democrats, for a handful of Democrats, but I've never been a Democrat, never registered that way. I've only voted for a handful of Democrats in my life. I've voted for far more Republicans than I ever have Democrats, and I've voted for far more Libertarians than I ever have Democrats. So, and now I consider myself an independent. I'm unaffiliated with any political party, and I'm just basically a classical liberal, libertarian-leaning kind of independent, and so, you know, not really being a conservative, but not really being a progressive. You know, I'm just kind of more of a radical centrist, a radical anti-authoritarian, a libertarian of sorts, but an independent more than anything. And so anyway, individual thinker, individualist and independent thinker. So so to that effect of, you know, an anti-fascist, like I am, reading an anti-fascist author who is a conservative, this kind of stood out to me. Reck says, and it should be observed that Balzac's viewpoint, Balzac is another character he's talking about, Balzac's viewpoint was that of a conservative, as is my own, and further observed that between this viewpoint and that of the nationalists, now when he says nationalists, he's talking about the Nazis. Between this viewpoint and that of the nationalists is a chasm as wide as a canyon. To be a conservative means to believe in the immutable laws of this old earth, this earth that will begin to shake and quake when the day comes to cleanse itself of all this filth. So, you know, he's a conservative, he's on the right, and fascism is an authoritarian right-wing ideology, but you know, in no way, shape, or form does Reck want to be lumped in with the nationalists, with the Nazis. So he says, you know, even though they're both on the right politically, he says there's a canyon between us, a canyon of difference in our outlook and our understanding of the world. Yeah, okay, let's see. All right. I don't want to go too long here, so so a quote that he has on nationalism. Reck says, nationalistic history writing. In Germany, the lies have a blonde character. Nationalism, a state of mind in which you do not love your own country as much as you hate somebody else's. So that's what he had come to view nationalism as under Nazi rule. He says, I believe that my call to resistance and a naysaying to mass man are justified in the face of this diagnosis and this prognosis based on mass man's biological instability and the fact that his periods of existence on the earth have always been short. Again, he talks about the Nazis as a termite heap. They can't think for themselves. They're anti-intellectual. They're anti-science. And they're all into this cult of personality and Aryan mythology. And so they've dispensed with real facts and real history and a scientific outlook, a rational, reasonable outlook. They've dispensed with all that in order to basically put at the front and center of the national identity their passions of anti-Semitism and nationalism and fascist ideas and fascist passions. Okay, so let's see. He talks a lot about what he's looking forward to when the Nazi regime finally crumbles, when it finally falls. He's hoping that that there will be a day of reckoning, and he's constantly lamenting the monstrosity of man's inhumanity towards fellow mankind. And yeah, so let's see. Oh, this is one of my favorite quotes from the book. He who knows how to die can never be enslaved. He who knows how to die can never be enslaved. I would rather die on my feet than live on my knees, was his attitude. Anyway, and that's Friedrich Reck and Diary of a Man in Despair. Now, a few notes on this. There's an afterword here. I mean, it's not real long. It's a little bit of a lengthy afterword, but the afterword is definitely worth reading, because in the afterword you find out that, you know, of course, in Nazi Germany, there's a war going on. There's a lot of propaganda. So some of the things that Reck talks about in the diary were rumors that he was hearing, and we find out in the afterword that in the years to come, later, that some of those rumors were not true. Some of the things that Reck had heard were not facts, and so it doesn't discount Reck's writing, but it's just a clarification that, you know, he was living under a fascist regime that was engaged in propaganda as well as being in a war zone. So he was not always getting good information himself, and he was basically just doing the best that he could do with the information that he was being given. But he was also he also had kind of a reputation of embellishing things. He was known as a talented storyteller, you know, as a historian and probably a teacher. He you know, had a propensity for being a good storyteller. And so, you know, as much as this diary gives us a good view into what it was like to live under the Third Reich for a German who was an anti-fascist conservative German, it should be taken with a bit of a grain of salt to understand that Reck was human. He's fallible, and he's not getting good information all the time, and he's basically just doing the best that he can. So, and then to wrap it up, Reck was arrested. He was about 60 years old, and you know, it's 1944. Germany is on its last legs, about to be defeated, and of course at that time, history tells us that they were basically drafting every man that they possibly could. all the way down to like the ages of 12 or maybe even younger. And old men, young men, all men were being drafted into service and used to throw against the incoming bullets and gunfire and bombs of the Allied powers, being sacrificed for Hitler's ego at the very end. For many months, a lot of people died that did not need to die when the outcome of the war was already inevitable. So Reck gets arrested in, 16th August 1944? Or is it October? October. He gets arrested in October of 1944 for resisting the draft. He was drafted into service, a 60-year-old war vet or military veteran himself. They're trying to draft him into service, but he's sick and he doesn't want to fight for the Nazis, so he tries to beg off and say that he's sick and that he can't answer the call. So they arrest him, they put him in prison for several days. He thinks he's going to be executed, but then they end up letting him go. Unfortunately, that was his last journal entry, was telling us about that episode when he thought he was going to be executed because he failed to answer the call into military service for the Nazis, and came back home and wrote about it, and then that's the last thing that he wrote about. We have other accounts, other historical records that tell us that Reck was again arrested in the days that followed, and let's see, he was taken to the Nazi concentration camp known as Dachau, and there in Dachau, he became sick. He fell ill, saw a camp doctor, but the doctor was not able to save him, and he died on February the 16th of 1945. Hitler commits suicide, I believe, in April of 1945, so February, March, April. He died about 2 months or something before Hitler did. So he died just a few months shy of the official end of World War II in the European theater. So unfortunately for Reck, he makes it through this time period, living under the days of the Third Reich, but the thing that he wanted to see the most, one of the things that seemed to give him the most fuel for living, for something to look forward to, was the day of reckoning that he wanted to see come to the Nazis. He died just shy of seeing that reckoning take place, and died just shy of seeing denazification in Germany. So, I hope you will get your own copy of this book, Diary of a Man in Despair by Friedrich Reck. This is maybe my all-time favorite diary that I've ever read. There's several popular diaries out there, even coming out of World War II. Most people know the Diary of Anne Frank, and there are others. I've read several, including the Diary of Anne Frank. This is my favorite. It's very much worth the read, and if you're concerned about fascism, if you feel at all in despair, if you feel as Reck did, a sense of loneliness and in a desperate time, when you see fascism rising and you're not sure what to do about it, this book might just give you a little bit of hope. If nothing else, it'll probably give you some comfort, and if not that, it'll at least give you something that you can kind of relate to and appreciate. Somebody else has already been through this before, and he recorded his experiences, so maybe they will give us heart in the future for those of us who might go through something similar. So that's it for week 6 of my undergrad course in resisting fascism and global history, undergraduate diary. As always, remember, fuck Trump, fuck ICE. See you next week.